Welcome to this month's episode of The Maker's Mindset. You can't talk about poetry or theatre or the creative arts and not mention his name. I am so excited to have the godfather, the poetry legend, Kagayi Ngobi.
Hi, I am the first maker.
Some of you may know him as Peter, some of you may know him as Ngobi, some of you may know him as Sam Kagayi. I know him as an icon in the poetry and theatre space. Join me as we welcome Peter Kagayi Ngobi. Welcome. Woo. Drum roll.
Yes.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Is that a genuine answer?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. In this heat, in this economy?
Oh, yeah.
You're doing fine.
I'm doing okay. I'm not complaining today.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes.
I want to get right into it quickly with my very first, it's like a personal curiosity. I called you Peter, but it has been brought to my attention.
Yes.
Grapevines are telling me that you don't use that name anymore.
Yes.
And I want to know why.
Because for me, it's a name that I choose not to represent me. Simply put, it is a Hebrew name, and I'm not a Hebrew.
Yeah.
Yeah, I decided to drop it because I didn't want it to represent me anymore.
Yeah.
I wanted to be represented by the names that come from my heritage. Yeah.
And that's Kagayi and Ngobi.
Yes.
So Ngobi, your chosen name, or it's always been there?
It's always been there, but it's a name that we never, none of my siblings except our youngest that they ever used. So the naming system from the Basogap is that you have two names, one from your mother's side, one from your father's side. And so Kagayi, I'm named after one of my father's uncles. His name was Kagayi, and then Ngobi is the name from my mother's father. It's also my mother's clan's name. My mother's clan's name.
Yeah.
It's the royal clan, so she's called Ngobi. So now the children that she gave birth to also carry the name of her heritage. Yeah. So hence the Ngobi.
Yeah. You know, there's a lot of creatives I have heard, dropping the Bible English names.
Yes.
And I like to pick their minds on that.
Yeah.
Because identity is a very big thing.
Yes.
In being a creative, an artist. And so we want to hear from you. Who are you?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer these questions anymore, because I think it's a question that I also ask myself.
Yeah.
And trying to find answers for it is difficult. But now I can comfortably say I am a poet. Yeah, I guess. So there's a line I used to use in a movie back in the day that was so cool. When someone asks, "Who are you?" I would say, "Who is but a form that follows the function of what? And what I am is a poet." Yeah, so I guess I can define myself through what I do every day. I am a poet, I am a teacher, I'm a publisher. Yeah, but then I also ask myself the question, who am I? Am I only defined by what I do?
Yeah.
Or how I live? So yeah, it's a constant question.
You ask yourself every day.
Yeah.
Is it easy being you?
Sometimes yes, and most times no.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think it's easy being what's the word? An avant-garde. Because I come from a generation of Ugandan poets who had to be rebels.
Yeah.
We had to rebel against society, structure, family, for us to be able to be who we want to be today. I don't think that's easy, but then it's also it's liberating in a way. It comes with its freedoms.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the freedom comes with a cost, I guess.
You know, I always tell people creatives are the luckiest people in the world, artists, because we have the privilege of living our dream, you know?
Also, we have the best workstation ever invented for humanity. The bed.
So most of your masterpieces created.
Yes. They always start from either you're dreaming or something like that. Yeah, but it's so easy for a creative to even get a pencil, paper, phone.
Yeah. On your border, taxi.
Like everywhere you go, it's your workstation.
Yeah.
Bathroom. You know, you're seriously working. People think you're spending a lot of time in the bathroom, but you're composing stuff.
And you're
so
working.
For me, one of the things that I enjoy being about a creative is that it allows me to be me.
Yeah.
Anywhere, anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Not many people have that. Not many people have that. And for every maker that comes on here, you know, I just want to say congratulations. That's a big step as a human being, you know. When we think of spoken word in Uganda, theater, we think of, you know, Peter Kagayi. So I want you to, you know, just the history, a brief history lesson. Where did it begin and how?
For me?
For you, but also for the industry.
As human beings, speaking is one of the ways that we've used to be understood for a very long time. And so spoken word as a word craft has been around and used in so many instances.
Yeah.
Now, for the term as it is used in poetry, of course, with the coming of, you know, the British colonialism and the education systems and teaching literature and all that, poetry was mostly looked at. Performance poetry was a thing that most of us who studied literature were educated out of. So we meet poetry as a written experience in most cases. And so it's been a battle for so many, what Frantz Fanon calls the colonized native, the educated native. It's been a battle for so long because you love poetry, you don't even know why you love poetry. You just find yourself even in school drawing, you know, being drawn to this art of creative expression. And then when you're out of school, that's when you realize, wait, but poetry and performance have been one and the same for a very long time.
Yeah.
And so it's a struggle that has been around for very long. For example, in the 60s, 70s in Uganda, there's a guy called Okot Pabite and his generation. Even when they were poets of the page, what I call the page poets, they also were very much passionate about performing poetry. So they would have public gatherings. David Rubadiri, who was their lecturer at the time, would host poetry readings at his house in Makerere University. In fact, if you've read that book, Growing Up with Poetry, a vast number of the contributors to that book were his students. And so they would meet, read poems, and then he would archive them. Okot Bitek in the 70s would go to, even in the 60s when he was the president, when he was the director of the Ugandan National Theatre, they would have poetry readings there. I read a book by Philippa Kabali-Kagwa, the daughter of Henry Ballo, and she was talking about the 60s, where her father, Henry Ballo, is a big Ugandan poet, where they used to go to the national, and she was 6 years old, and she still remembers when they would go to the green room and they would listen to poetry. She also remembers the first time that she also shared the poem. Then Femwright in the 90s came along and started the Readers Writers Club, and it was another space where people up to now still go. I think it's the longest could be one of the oldest writers clubs in East Africa, if not Africa. In the 90s, so the culture of writers meeting to share their work orally, whether they are reading from the page or they have memorized the work, has been around for a while. Into the 2000s as well, at now it is called Katikati in Lugogo, but at the time it was called Wagadugu. Poets, writers, they used to meet there, and they would also, with beer, of course, and meat, they would meet and read to each other their poems. It was a popular social event as well, and quite a number of people today, even still alive, were part of it. Even others like Professor Timothy Wangusa, every time they would be having book launches at the National Theatre or Makerere University, they would have these public readings, but they were mostly elitist, as I can imagine.
Yeah.
So people that used to turn up were professors, students of literature, teachers of literature, etc. It really never broke into the social fabric beyond those spaces. But Okot Bitek had kind of achieved that, where he would have performing arts festivals in Gulu, in Kisumu, Nairobi, and these were popular spaces where even the everyday people, scholars, elites would meet and they would share poetry in English, in other languages, etc. I think the story for Uganda becomes unique between 2007, starting with 2008, up to now. Because
do you know which class I was in 2008?
Which class?
I was in P1.
P1.
Didn't even know what poetry is.
When you were in P1, there was a guy called Guy Mambo. He was a student of architecture at Makerere University, and his dream was to start a poetry club. And so Guy Mambo went on a drive between 2007 and 2008 just to rally university students at Makerere to start a poetry club, and they started in Africa Hall.
Oh,
yes, that's
Africa Hall.
Yes, and they had the first session there, and at the time, they were just meeting to read to each other their favorite poems. But I think the numbers grew, and they decided to move away from Africa Hall. And Guy Mambo took it upon himself to go to the National Theatre. And he realized that there was space there. And without seeking permission, without writing a letter to anyone, just told, guys, we are going to start meeting at the National Theatre. The director at the time was called, now he's the late Joseph Walugembe. And the lantern, that's when the Lantern Meet of Poets was born. The lantern. And what used to happen is that every other Sunday, these guys who used to love poetry would meet, and they would meet in a circle and share poetry. Until, of course, the security officers took interest in these guys who meet at the theatre every Sunday. And they approached them and they asked them, what are you guys doing here? And Guy Mambo said, we are the youth of Uganda. The National Theatre belongs to the youth. We are here to promote culture through poetry. And they told them to leave, and they said, we are not leaving. This country is ours, And so the security officers let the director of the National Theatre know that there's a group of rowdy youth who meet here, and they think that this place belongs to them. So the director took interest in the case, and this particular Sunday, he turns up to interrogate these guys, and he comes with security guards. And so he asks, who are you? And Guy Mambo says, we are the Lantern Meet of Poets. We are Ugandan poets, and this is where we meet to practice our art at the Uganda National Theatre. And now I think the security guards thought maybe there was going to be some action, but then the director actually was awed at the confidence. And so he invited Guy Mambo to his office, and then that's when he talked about structure and writing permission. And from that day, the National Theatre became the official home for the Lantern Meet of Poets. Little did we know that the National Theatre was actually becoming the home to the future of poetry in Uganda.
Yeah.
Because what happened is that the Lantern Meet started performing, like the group went away from just reading other people's poems to writing their own poems, then to performing poetry. And so the National Theatre, for me, holds the history of being the first space where, at least in urban poetry,
Yeah.
where spoken word was birthed, and nurtured.
Yeah.
You know, and it even grew into other scales. So it was the first place. If you're to ask me, also, I also started joining poetry through the Lantern Meets. A friend of mine invited me to go and watch a poetry show. I'd never heard of the word recital. I'd never even ever envisioned that Uganda has poets. For me, from that time, to be a writer, you had to be dead. My understanding was that all the poets that I was reading about in class were dead. So Susan Chuguli was dead, Timothy Wangusa was dead, Arthur Gakwandi was dead, Austin Bukenya was dead, Goreti Chomuhendo was dead, realistically. So for me to come across the idea that there are even Ugandan poets, to make matters worse, they were my age mates. To make matters worse, some of them were my course mates at law school. I was really taken back, and for me that's when my journey started in 2009, when I went to 2009, when I joined the Lantern Meet after attending that show. So for me, the history of spoken word, I think for me, finds grounding at that time when Guy Mambo and his friends went to the National Theatre, a performance space where they could be allowed to experiment with performing poetry. I remember Mark Gordon Musinguzi, also joined the Lantern Meet around the same time, around 2010, and it was after that he started Open Mic Uganda, and with the Ernest Sesangas and Patrick Masabi Rabis and Shiraz. That generation also came out of the Lantern Meet. And then there were also other poetry nights that started sprouting out to just promote the idea of performance poetry through spoken word. We had Ife's poetry night. There was Roshan. Roshan also had a poetry night. Quite a number of guys started, and then the Lantern Meet was also being active. So that's when the generation started embracing poetry and performance, taking poetry from the page and taking it strictly on stage. Memorization became a key component of delivering poetry. We could talk of things like a poetry crowd, a poetry audience. That's when the culture started, and from then up to now, it's been growing. I think the Lantern Meet also, starting 2010, 2011, took the drive not just to society but also schools. So that's when the poetry programs started. I think the first school we went to was Old Kampala SS, and then we also ventured into other schools, and now the cultures, they have just started coming in. Then out of Open Mic Uganda, that's how Shiraz created the Teen Poetry Slam, again for the schools. And so the culture has, and the Teen Poetry Slam has been around for now. This is year number 6, year number 5.
Since around 2015.
Yes. There you go. And the irony is that the Lantern Meet did not even have students of literature. You know, there were all students from other vocations that were passionate about poetry and could allow. I guess the lack of being educated out of literature was also liberating in a way. Because it allowed them to experiment with so many ideas. I can tell you, for example, at that time, we used to watch a lot of Deaf Poetry Jam by Russell Simmons. Those series that they did where they were, touring with spoken word poetry in the US. I guess as the culture was growing, we realized that it was also growing around the world. There were other poets in East Africa as well, Mufasa, Sitawa Namwali, from Kenya, we came across from Tanzania, from Rwanda. And so we realized that this brand of spoken word, this thing was not just uniquely Ugandan. It was part of a wave that was spreading across the entire world. Yeah. So that's where we are, briefly.
Woo! End of class. That's very interesting. You know, very interesting, because we hear of these names, the Mark Gordons, the Murray, but to see the steps that were taken is a whole other thing. And it's powerful because, like you said when we were talking, it's a movement now, a very big movement. You can't go to a high school and there's no poetry. And I think it's something that is very deeply embedded in our culture. You know? We're having people doing Evitontome, Sewolule. We have Mitch representing, you know, Busoga. It's beautiful. But now I want to get into the nitty-gritties of what does it take to be a poet? Like what, you know, because I have a problem. These days, everyone is a poet.
Everyone is a poet.
Everyone who's deep is a poet. Someone who writes is a poet. What is a poem? And what's the process of creating that like?
There are so many definitions of poetry that have been given to us by classics, by poets. For me, poetry is, I would call it the rhythm of life. I'd put it generally like that, to encompass everyone that practices or thinks practices poetry. Now, to me, how I do it as Kagayi, I look at a poem as a composition, a piece of creativity of words that have been arranged to have a unique sonic quality, a unique sonic and mnemonic quality. Sonic referring to a uniqueness of sound, and mnemonic referring to a uniqueness of memory. And so, for me, I believe that you know, when I'm creating whatever I'm going to call a poem, the things that I'm looking out for that will make it a poem is, how does it sound? And then how is it memorable?
Okay, and what's your creative process like? Let's say we're writing a poem. Do you need candles? Do you need, you know, what's your process? How do you know, by the way, creatives are funny. Someone will tell you, I need to take lavender tea and sit facing southwest.
Is this where we call a spade a spade?
Yeah, call a spade a spade.
Okay, my process varies with time. Now, Lantern Meet of Poets was a very special place to me as a person who, and I joined it when I was in third year, because it was a space of fellow creatives, and we used to meet and critique and give each other ideas on what to write and what to shape. So at that point, my creativity was shaped by the group, camaraderie group. I was a groupie. And so that's how my creativity, I'll tell you, for example, some of my best poems that I wrote up to now, the ones that people remember most, were written during that process in the Lantern Meet. Some of the poems are now 10 years old, 13 years old, and people still remember that because the process helped me refine them. So poems like 2065, the audience must say amen. The Bench Wanuka poem. So many of them, they were written out of that process. So even in Kitara Nation, it's a process that I tried and now I've failed to replicate the camaraderie, just getting, you know, poets to sit together, we write together, critique each other. So there was that phase. Now, when I left the Lantern Meet, I struggled. To be honest, I struggled a bit.
Why do you think you struggled?
Because I lost the support system. I lost the structure of support, and I had to learn how to write without feedback. I also had to learn how to get feedback from, because feedback is important to any writer, to any artist, you know, because it helps you, it sort of gives you direction, clarifies your vision. Yeah. And so I was a patron at the Rhymers Poetry Club at the time in Nabisunsa. So what I would do is that I would write poetry and then take them to my students to give me feedback. And then I also started the poetry night called the Poetry Shrine, and we would only debut new material. So I was always in constant search for a space where maybe my work would find validation from fellow poets, but that was before I could share it publicly. So there is that phase. But I also realized in this journey of trying to write alone that if I wanted to make a career out of poetry, I had to give myself a routine to which I could create. You know, I have a friend of mine who had this notice behind his bedroom door, and it says, "Writing is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration." So it's a thing that I try to practice. So there was a time Daniel O'Mara lived at my house before he left for Russia. And what we used to do was we used to give each other creative writing games. So we would give each other challenges. So it's not about writing a good poem. It's just about getting yourself in motion of writing, so that when inspiration hits you, you know, it finds you ready, sharp. You know, you've already mastered the art of identifying the metaphor and shaping the symbol. But then also there are some uncanny habits that writers use. That let me talk about myself, not others. So say that we have used, say for example, you can decide to resort to drugs, to drinking, because of the way it makes you feel. And for a writer, and there are so many writers like that. I was just reading about Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote his famous poem, The Raven, when he was high on cocaine. Shakespeare as well, like quite a number, who was always smoking opium before he could write his sonnets. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, before he wrote Kubla Khan, the famous poem Kubla Khan, he was high. There are so many writers who sort of tend to resort to, to substance use in order to motivate their creativity. And Kabira, it's one of the big problems we have in our poetry fraternity today. There are quite a number of young artists who are relying on drugs
to tap into
their creativity. For me, what I would say is that I always go back to writing is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. So yes, you're getting high. You're getting yourself into this realm to want to create the perfect poem, the perfect art piece. But remember, that's just 1%. And so for me, I feel like most of these young writers, most of these artists, the 1% has become the 99%. You know, and so they slack on. They become profligate, because you lose the discipline of creating. And then also that's where the addictions start coming in, because the moment you cannot create because you're high, the moment you cannot create because you're drunk, it means that you've given away your power of creativity to these substances. And what happens for most of these poets is that they start creating work to make money to feed their substance abuse, those addictions. And so it sort of becomes a cycle. So as a society, as a generation, we end up losing so many creative minds, either to the addictions or to death, or to just the ambivalence of giving up, because of the substance abuse. So for me, where I'm living right now, what I say is that master the discipline of constant produce. Give yourselves tasks. Yes, you can, and there are so many other ways. You can take a trip. If you say you don't have the money, you can take a walk in the neighborhood. You know, take a walk where you live. You know, write, observe something, write, go back. The data you have, read about, you know, how to improve on your rhyming style, your rhythmic structures, your rhythmic pattern. Like, invest a lot more in your abilities rather than substance abuse. And also, how do audiences, your readers, your listeners, you know, how will they take in your work if it's not well crafted? No matter how high you get, no matter how drunk you can get, and write whatever you think you're writing, if without sobriety, you know, you edit it, you craft it, then the audiences are not going to take it. They're not going to take you seriously. And the trouble with that is, there's this saying in Ugandan, the person who does a bad thing is one, but the clan is the one that takes the whole insult. So if the audience gets used to this particular poets or group of poets doing things that way, then it becomes all of us. You know. And so for me, the poet also being conscious of the fact that
you're representing.
Yes, you're representing.
Very true. And I
consciously and subconsciously.
Now I want us to flip. You mentioned the word career.
Yes.
And I interacted with someone sometimes, said, you know, as a creative, as an artist, you can't have a career. You know, you don't have a career. Career is something else. This was someone in like your typical white collar job, you know. And I want to get into the money bit, the industry bit, you know. Number one, are you a poet full time?
Yeah, full time.
Oh yes. I was told, again, you know, grapevines. You know, when you're a legend, there's a lot of here and there. So apparently you dropped out of law school.
No.
No? Okay,
I dropped out of LDC.
Oh, LDC.
I dropped out of LDC. I have my degree as a lawyer. Yes.
But you have never practiced?
I practiced for 5 days. I think it still counts.
And it does. And on the 6th, you were like, nah,
I was like, no.
Not for me.
This is not my place.
And how?
I spent those 5 days writing poems, yo.
Yeah.
Like I had a desk. I had an office. I had paper. I had pens. The law firm didn't know what to do with me except just give me errands, run to this court, and give this document to this one, so go and pay so and so, and I would come back, and I have all this time, and I was writing poems. So at the end of day 5, I was like, well, I might as well stay home and write poems rather than go leave home and, you know, fake to everyone that you're going to do law work. So.
And how has that been? How have you navigated, you know, now earning a living in a financial sense from this craft? Especially within Uganda, but I now see you're transcending Germany, theater, and all of that. We haven't even gotten to the theater bit. But how are you living off poetry?
First and foremost, before I took the decision to make poetry my main thing, I was aware of the challenges that existed within the fraternity. I had asked myself the question, how could it be possible to make a living out of poetry? And so these were things that I was, these are questions that I had asked myself from the word get-go. And I knew that I had to find ways of adding, I had to first and foremost create a market. Like, there are no people who like poetry, boom, get some people who like poetry. There are no poetry products, boom, do some poetry products. Even before I started writing poetry, was that it's possible to have an audience of people who love poetry. Like, people love poetry, you know, and they love it through performance. And they would gladly turn up and pay you for it. Just make it worth their time. And so that's something that I always knew, even when I joined the Lantern Meet. So I knew that it was possible to make a career out of poetry through performance. I also knew that it was possible to make a career out of poetry through publications, because I knew that the people that love your poetry in performance were always asking people. Those people would always ask us, "Where can I find your book? Where can I find your work?"
Yeah.
And so I knew that if you make your work available in this reduced form, either in audio form or, the book form, people would buy it. So I knew that when you have an audience of people that listen to poetry, they'd also be willing to take products of poetry.
Yeah.
I knew that. Thirdly, I also knew that there were organizations that would give funding to poetry programs.
Yeah.
But again, it was important to gain their trust, to show them that poetry has an audience, it has an appeal out there.
Yeah.
So before I stepped out, one of the earliest things I remember I told myself, Kabera, was this. I said, and for me, this is one of my achievements.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm to slap my back, I would say this I achieved. I say to myself, Kagayi, when you're setting out, make sure whoever comes to Uganda and they mention the word poetry, your name should be coming up next after that. I wanted to brand myself to be that person in literature circles in Uganda, where if the word poetry was mentioned, the name Kagayi was next, was around the year. And what did that mean? It meant I had to put myself out there as a poet. So the first thing that was important was to acknowledge that I am a poet by profession.
Yeah, by profession.
By profession.
Emphasis on that.
I am a poet. Like you, I had to embody the identity of poesy.
Yeah.
So that when they say, Kagayi, you talk about Kagayi, you mean Kagayi the poet.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was very important that people don't say Kagayi the lawyer, Kagayi the teacher. No, Kagayi
the poet.
The guy who the poet. Actually, it's Kagayi, the poetry guy. That's how I was normally called.
Yeah.
And I was very, very critical about that. So what that meant was that first, embrace poetry as a career. Don't just wear it, breathe it. Secondly, to be active in all literature circles.
Yeah.
So when you go to a conference, put up your hand and say, "My name is Kagayi Ngobi, I am a poet." And then you ask your question. It meant going to theater shows. It meant wherever you go to interact, you talk.
Yeah.
It also meant that when people have events, you go and attend. When a poet calls you for an event, you go and support. Like basically putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
I remember when we started out, for us, even when you wanted the money, I knew that the money that I wanted, Kabera, this I know, and I keep telling poets that the money that I wanted to make out of poetry, I knew that it was not in Uganda.
Yeah.
I knew that it was not here.
Mm-hmm.
What I knew was here for me was the name, was the reputation, were the connections, the contacts that you make.
Yeah.
So I volunteered for so many projects. I put myself out. I performed for so many platforms. I did a lot of work. Like every opportunity they are calling for, this festival is reaching out for volunteers, you go. There is this workshop, you can register, you go. There is this conference, you go. You go. There is this book launch, you go. Everything, and up to now, it's still what I do.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's what has made me. It's the reputation that. So schools, I would go and I was working at Nabisusa for free. Like the schools, we don't have money to pay you. Like, yeah, just give me transport, I will come. You go, you do the work, and also for me, the idea of the approach, the other approach that I had was that I read this quote once that if a man is to sweep the streets.
Yeah.
The
Martin
quote.
Luther.
Yes, yes. Like,
Yeah.
do it the way Shakespeare wrote poetry, the way Beethoven composed music. Because give it your all. Like, even if it's a small role, like, do it to the level that people will be like, yo, like this guy just gave it their all. And so for me, that was the spirit with which I started my career. I
Yeah.
wanted people to know that I was passionate about it, that I was in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, that's how my career kicked off.
Yeah.
And everything that I've been able to get out of what looks like a career now,
Yeah.
it's been out of the networks that I made back then.
That's interesting. You know, we as Ugandans, I think, no shade, but we have a very shy approach to money, right?
Yes.
And we are not transparent. We are just very, I don't know, shy and about money, right? And that's a problem.
We are financially illiterate.
Yeah, financially illiterate. We are
Yeah.
not confident in our skills.
Yes.
But I assume that you are confident in your skills, and I'm going to put you on a spotlight,
Okay.
right? If I have an event and I want Peter Kagayi to do a perform for me for 5 minutes, what would that cost me?
So are you asking that question as the organizer or as a poet who wants to know how to charge us, how to rate your card?
Both. First answer as an organizer and then as a poet.
Now, for me, as an organizer, for me, what I would say is, look at your budget.
Yeah.
Because ultimately,
So we are
can give you a rate
negotiating.
card.
Yeah.
No, I don't like negotiating. I like you telling me the best because, like I said, for me, I put my best foot forward.
Yeah.
So put your best foot forward too. But it would depend on quite a number of factors. What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
If you want me to write an original poem, if you want me to put music to it,
Yeah.
do you want me to come and write it and read it? Do you want me to come and write it but memorize it and dramatize it?
Yeah.
So all those phases. So
There are factors.
Yes. So for me, what I would tell the organizer is do your homework. Know how Kagayi does his work. Then come to me, well understanding the task you're giving me. Because you tell me you want a poem in 5 minutes and maybe you're asking me to write a new poem, and then I will tell you, well, that's going to cost you 6 million. And you're going to say, but for 5 minutes. And then another time, you'll give me a task, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm okay with 200K.
Yeah.
You see. So for me, the question of the organizers, when it comes to how they prize the poet, I throw it back to them, and I'm like, no, go and invest time in understanding how a poet works.
100%.
It's on them.
Yeah.
Now, for the poet, how do you design your rate card?
Yeah.
First and foremost, how much are you investing in the process of creating this presentation? And how do you compute what is valuable?
Yeah.
So for me, first and foremost, this is what I look at. What are you going to wear? You don't have to think of going to Woolworths, to get the most expensive. But look at your wardrobe and say, okay, these shoes that I'm wearing, these clothes that I'm wearing, how much did they cost me? Because that's part of
the performance.
That's part of the performance.
Yeah.
So, 1. 2, look at your writing material. What are you using to write? Yes, that pen, that paper, that notebook, that MacBook, that laptop, that desktop, that table you're using to write on that you bought. So your tools of trade, value them, because that is all part of, they're all contributing to your creative process.
I think I need to take some notes. Tools of trade.
Yes. Yeah. And then also ask yourself the question, if you're going to memorize, if it's a poem that you've been asked to present while you're memorizing, what are your tools? What are the tools you're using to memorize?
Yeah.
For example, how much time is it going to take you, to record that time? Yeah. The space where have you hired space to practice? Or do you presume that just because you're doing it in your living room in front of your mirror, but even a mirror that you bought?
Yeah.
So for me, it is about understanding what your tools of trade are and how you compute the value they bring to your process. Now, for example, for me, their performances right now, if you're to ask me to come and perform, I'll have to factor in rehearsal space.
Yeah.
I have to factor in the crew that I'm going to perform with.
Mm-hmm.
So you could tell Kagayi, so you tell Kagayi, I want you to perform one poem, I want you to do your best. And I'm like, you want me to do my best? Then I'm like, okay, I need a guitarist, I need a drummer, then we shall need transport we shall need transport for those things. We need to rehearse. We need to budget for rehearsal time. We need to budget for rehearsal space. Or we need to eat.
Yeah.
People need airtime. People need data to communicate. So you compute these things, and then that's when you're like, okay, now for that one poem, I think I'll take 5 million. And then they're like, but it's too much. You're like, no, but this is how I'm going to do it. So for me, it's about the same way I tell the producer of the event to go ahead and understand the process of the artist before you can frame how much you think they earn. I would also tell the artist, first understand your tools of trade, understand your process, value it. Value it. The transport, how you're going to move from home to the place where you're going to work, to and fro. All those are costs. When you're rehearsing, speaking is laborious to the body. You need to rest. You also need a massage at the end of it. You need food.
For the voice.
You need to
energy.
drink. You need energy.
You
need all these things. So for me, I think what most poets miss out from this process is valuing the things that they take for granted, their tools of trade. So for me, that's the first thing that you have to look at, your tools of trade. Secondly, look at your process of composition. 3, look at the amount of time that you're going to take to memorize, to compose yourself, to be ready for this particular process. And then the other one is, which is also important, is if it's possible, if it's an organization, go to their company prospectus. Go and look at how much they earn a year, because that's when you, if UN comes and gives you a gig, and the UN asks you, Kabera, tell us how much you want us to pay you, and then also Chitara Nation comes, and then Chitara Nation is a local company, and then you look at the prospectus and you say, okay, this is UN. They're making this. They have all this. The project has this amount of money. These ones, I'm also telling them, give me 2,000 euros. And then you look at Chitara Nation, like, Chitara Nation, my people. This one's okay. You give me 500K. So it's also important to do some research about your employer, your prospective employer. Understand how deep their pockets go, because you don't want to undervalue yourself or to also overrate yourself out of the gig. So it's really a lot of it's about first knowing your worth, but then also knowing the worth of the person giving you the gig.
So on the whole pricing thing, that's a very big thing that we need to address, that it's a synthesis. You don't just arrive. Like you mentioned, you volunteered for a while. People don't have that patience, but
people don't. And but you see, society rewards you for your musicians create music, and even when you think it's crap, they're still getting adulation and veneration from society. It's because for this music, we are rewarding you for your story, for your journey, for your worth, And most young people are wanting the quick fix, wanting the quick profit, wanting the, wanting more value with less effort. It's a struggle, but thing is, society meets you out.
The process, and those are, should I say, soft skills they tell us, the soft skills of how to navigate industries. Because now you're an authority, but it was a lot of work.
But then maybe, Kabira, I should also say this, that I come from the generation that believes that poetry belongs to the people. Also the generation that believes that society rewards you for your effort. Of course, it's not what it is. It's not what it is. And so for me, it's more important that I create, and there is a space where I can go and deliver the work, because that's my job. The questions of survival are very key, and we need to constantly look for the answers to them, but they should not, okay, at least for me, they do not let me forget my role as a poet, as an artist in my community. Yeah.
That's cool. I just want people to know. So in our conversation before, these guys, the OGs, used to refuse money. You told me, you guys, how do you pay for poetry? Their shows were free, you know.
We would even pay the audience almost.
Right, sir. They would buy people drinks.
Them drinks, and
you guys were on a whole other frequency of thought.
Yes, it was very different.
Yeah.
And you know, in the Lantern Meet, we used to say our vision was to restore the epoch of Uganda's lost literary greatness. So we believed in ideas that were bigger than us. We were arrogant, we were proud.
Yeah.
But we believed that, we believed in the ideal, and we lived that ideal. And the beautiful thing about it is, at least, you know, for me as Kagayi, it's a memory locked in my experience. Yeah. So I know that poetry is for society. Yeah. We have to give, you know, even when we know we need money, we also need to fight against money. Yeah. Because it becomes a hindrance, and then it can also become an instructor of your creativity. Very so true. As an artist, or as a poet in this case, you are constantly finding ways of, you know, negotiating the creative space where you're not adulterated with thoughts of, you know, let me write the next poem that's going to get me money. Yeah. But no, let me write the thing that you know, people need to hear. Yeah. People need to hear. And you know the other, okay, but go on this. But you see, the other challenge is that this generation where we are, we are living in an era where entertainment is the thing. Yeah. Where we even call it the entertainment industry. But see, poetry is not just entertainment, you know. So we are living at a time where producers and curators of spaces are calling out poets to be entertaining, to be entertainers. But what basically they are saying is that we are looking for poets who can get people to laugh. Yeah, water down the craft. And I don't know if it's watering down the craft. What I know is that it's asking the artist to bend to the will of the audience. You know, so the audience has been given so much power that it gets to determine who is entertaining and who isn't. Yeah. You know, so so now that's the challenge that the poet today has to live by. Yeah. You know, to determine how do I create content that curators will not like, but I also want audiences to love, to take in, but then I also want curators to give me money. Yeah. So authenticity, for me, the challenge is to retain to identify, define, and retain your authenticity as an artist in today's modern age. Yeah, that's very important. Really, really cool. A lot has changed, you know. Right now, you go for an event and there's a poet, which is great stuff, you know. I think you guys must be proud. I'm telling you, you go for introductions, weddings, burials, birthdays. I'm telling you, it's everywhere. You know. Yeah. Do you think we will ever fill? You know how we had recently, I think Winnie Nwaji filled Lugogo Cricket Oval. Do you think we will ever have a poet fill Lugogo Cricket Oval? Yes. And still maintain absolutely yes. What's going to happen is poetry will get into the mainstream media. But the thing that's going to make it stand, and the thing that will make it stand out, is that it will connect with people in ways that that music has made them forget how to connect. This is where, for me, I caution poets who are going audiovisual, multimedia. Even when you go that path, do not lose the spirit of the thing that you do that's called poetry. Yeah. That's the thing, that it's a spirit. And yes, a time will come when there is just a general mass of conscious people that want to listen to truth. To truth. Yeah.
That's very deep. I don't even know how to. Need I say more?